Hello and welcome back. This is Greg French. Today we're going to be looking at computer repair training, hardware, lesson 1, part 2. Also on here you can see the computer repair training plus.com. This is a website where you can find some additional resources for the material that we're covering. You might check that out if you're interested. Motherboard. We're going to be looking at the motherboard today. This is the main board, the largest circuit board in the computer. It contains the CPU, memory, north bridge, south bridge, a lot of other parts. We'll be talking about those parts. The main categories on the motherboard, we have the processing, the CPU, temporary storage, the RAM, communications, and power. We'll be discussing those. Everything, it says all communicate with the CPU. Everything on the motherboard, everything connected to the computer, all has to communicate with the CPU. CPU is the central processing unit. Every piece of data that's generated has to be processed by the CPU. Peripherals. The peripherals are devices that are connected to the computer and they're linked via a cable. So you have some kind of a data cable that connects devices to the computer, such as the keyboard has a connection, mouse has a connection, monitor has a connection. You might also have a modem or a cable for a network. That also is a peripheral device connected to the computer. Here's an example of a motherboard. You can see there's quite a few components on the motherboard, either on or off the motherboard. Again, everything has to communicate to the CPU. CPU has to process all the data. Here's a side view of the motherboard with some of the I/O connections. This is an ATX style motherboard. Again, here you can see here this is a eSATA. These are external SATA or external serial drives, the new technology 3 gigabits per second. Also we have USB 2, we have 8 ports here. Also we have on the top of this we have a FireWire connection and a gigabit LAN. A gigabit LAN is a billion bits per second LAN connection. Audio, we have a little optical audio connection here and your other typical audio ports. CPU and chipset. CPU performs the data processing. It processes all the data and the instructions. Now the chipset, it's microchips. They control this data flow. We'll be talking about the chipsets. Very important because they do manage the flow of the data on the motherboard. Manufacturers of CPUs and chipsets, Intel being the major number one. 80% of the market is controlled by Intel. AMD is a good competitor. We've enjoyed having them keeping Intel on their toes. We also have VIA, SIS, and Cyrix. Here's showing the chipsets. We've got the north bridge right here, and then we have a south bridge. The north bridge controls the memory to the CPU, also the video card. So the north bridge has to operate very quickly. Otherwise, we can have a bottleneck in our computer, so we have to have fast RAM and a fast video card in order to keep our computer running at its top speed. There's also a south bridge down here. Now, the south bridge can control everything else. Your PCI connectors here, any SATA or any hard drive connections, also any FireWire, mouse port connections, keyboard connections. So everything else goes through here. Here's a diagram. CPU, north bridge stands for, NB stands for north bridge. It's also called the memory controller. Intel just recently moved their memory controller onto their CPU with the Core i7. The video and RAM are normally controlled with the north bridge, and then the south bridge again controls everything else. This is a diagram I've drawn up, and I expect my students to be able to draw it too, so you might take notes on this because I'm going to ask you to draw it. Storage devices. Primary storage. Primary storage is temporary. It's RAM. Computer needs a lot of RAM in order to push data and instructions through it. The RAM is usually very fast. Not quite as fast as the CPU, but much faster than our secondary storage device, the hard drive. The RAM today can push gigabits of data, where the hard drives are still constrained to about 100 megabits, considerably slower. This is a picture of Corsair RAM module.